Sungazer, which is a project featuring Adam Neely and Sean Crowder, recently put out an awesome new tune called Threshold, as well as some great videos to go along with it. I was really intrigued by this tune because it delves into a lot of the rhythmic concepts that I've been experimenting with myself lately. How you feel odd grouped rhythms, how grooves are perceived, and whether time signatures even matter at all. In Adam's video, he talks about the slowest and fastest perceptual rhythms, the slowest being roughly 33 beats per minute, and the fastest being somewhere around 10 notes per second. Both of these are happening simultaneously in Threshold by having 33 beats per minute divided into a 19 tuplet. And this got me thinking, what would it be like to have an entire piece of music that's beyond this threshold? So I decided to write it. If you've listened to any of my music, you'll know that writing super slow music isn't really what I do. I spent the majority of my youth learning to do this. So writing something slower than 33 beats per minute wasn't going to work very well for me, but I thought I could write a piece that was above the 10 note per second threshold for the entirety of the tune. So I set myself these limitations. Every instrument has to play faster than the 10 note per second threshold the entire time. I can use rests, otherwise this challenge would literally just be every instrument shredding for the whole tune, but at least one instrument must always be traveling beyond the threshold. No held notes in any instrument. If an instrument is not playing above the 10 note per second threshold, it must be resting. I only broke this once at the very end of the tune, but this is my challenge, so I can do whatever I want. There needs to be some kind of perceptible groove. I can repeat the same note in places by doing a tremolo. And this might be cheating, but it was necessary if I was to create any kind of real melodic hook. And once again, this is my challenge, so I can do whatever I want. And finally, it must be a cohesive piece of music, not just a bunch of super fast nonsense. In Adam's video, he talks about the upper limit of how fast our brains can process subdivisions, and that's roughly 10 notes per second. I actually have a handy formula for figuring out how many notes per second are being played. I came up with this when I was 18 and obsessed with how fast I could play, but it's coming in handy here, I think. You take the subdivision, or the number of notes per beat, multiply that by the beats per minute, and divide all of that by 60. For example, 16th notes at 180 would be 4 times 180, that gives you 720. Divide that by 60 and you get 12, so 12 notes per second. I reversed this formula to figure out how fast 10 notes per second is as 16th notes, and that gave me an idea of what tempo I needed to go above in this piece. So 10 times 60 equals 600, divide that by 4, you get 150 beats per minute. So 10 notes per second is the equivalent of 16th notes at 150 beats per minute, and that means the tempo of my piece needs to be above 150 beats per minute, and nothing can be slower than a 16th note. I thought it would be fun to push this a little bit further than that. In Threshold, Adam and Sean, my good buddies who I'm clearly on a first name basis with, are playing a 19 tuplet at 33 beats per minute. Put this into the formula and you get 10.45 notes per second. This is equal to 16th notes at about 157 beats per minute. And I thought that if I really wanted to break this threshold, I've got to go beyond that. My first thought was just to make a bigger tuplet at 33 beats per minute. So instead of 19, let's do 20. This would make it 11 notes per second, and I could have used this, but I really wanted to use a prime number. Otherwise, you can just divide it into equal smaller chunks. 20 could be 5 groups of 4, for example, or 21 could be 7 groups of 3. I ended up landing on the next prime number, 23, and that gave me a 23 tuplet at 33 beats per minute. And I promise I'm not doing this just to flex on my buddies Adam and Sean. This is the equivalent of 12.65 notes per second, or about 190 beats per minute as 16th notes. And this is where I started when writing the tune. I have it notated as 2316 at 190 beats per minute, instead of using the 23 tuplet. It's much easier to read this way. Once I worked out a few of the musical ideas, I realized that this was just too fast for me to play, or at least for me to play with the ideas I was coming up with. And it kind of lacked a groove at this insane speed. So as I wrote, the tune worked its way down to 175 beats per minute, which is still 11.666 notes per second. So it's still quite a ways above the threshold, but it's a tempo that makes this piece at least somewhat musical. 2316 provided me with lots of options for subdividing. I mainly focused on dividing 23 into the most even subdivisions I could, and this allowed me to create a couple of somewhat normal sounding grooves. In the first section, I divided 23 as 3 groups of 6 and 1 group of 5. This makes 4 almost even beats, which I treat like 4/4 by putting the snare on the third of these beats. And here's how that sounds without all of the in-between notes. This delves into the idea of how we perceive rhythm. There's all this crazy fast stuff happening, but on top of that is this slower, wonky 4/4 feel. It helps to ground the more extreme side of things with some kind of a perceivable groove. I take this same approach in the other parts of the tune. In the big melodic section, I have it subdivided as 4 groups of 5 and 1 group of 3. This I'm feeling as 4 beats of 5 or 4 quintuplet beats with an extra beat of 3 tagged on at the end. It's kind of similar to how you see 9/8 approach sometimes, like a 4/4 bar with an extra 8th note tagged on at the end. This one is a little harder to feel than the intro rhythm, but it still has an understandable groove, especially because I'm continuing those snare backbeats on the third of these groupings of 5. The last way I divide 23 happens in the middle section of the song. Here it's grouped as 5 groups of 4 and 1 group of 3. And this I'm treating like a slow 6/8 bar, but the last beat is a little bit shorter. This is by far the easiest of these grooves to feel, because most of the groupings here have 4 notes, making them feel like a normal quarter note. This approach of grouping 23 in even-ish subdivisions and treating those like common time signatures allowed me to create a piece of music that has a groove, and that helps to offset the extreme speed that every instrument is playing at. This ended up being an incredibly difficult compositional challenge. I always encourage musicians to set limitations for themselves when composing or playing, but typically these limitations are in the other direction. I'll often have my students improvise and tell them not to play anything faster than an 8th note, for example, and this allows them to focus on note choice and phrasing. The same goes for composing. By forcing yourself to not rely on speed, you have to think about melody, harmony, texture, mood, instrumentation, dynamics, range, and these things can easily be pushed aside in favor of a bunch of notes and cool licks. But in this piece, every instrument is literally breaking this speed threshold the entire time. And this forced me to look at other compositional devices to create a tune that felt musical and cohesive. Usually when I'm writing something that's fast and aggressive like this, I like to balance it with slower melodies, or maybe some held out chords in the keyboard, something that can add some contrast to the faster parts. Or I might have entire sections of a piece slowed down so that the fast parts feel even faster by comparison. Because I couldn't do that here, I put most of my focus on the harmony, dynamics, rhythmic variations, instrumentation, and the overall mood of each different section. The different subdivisions of 23 that I talked about earlier help to add some rhythmic variety to this piece. The harmony is a little different in each major section. I took a modal approach at the beginning, a more key signature based approach in the main melodic section, and then an outside chromatic approach for the heavy riff at the end. Choosing when to bring in the rhythm guitars, bass, and double kick was really important here. The more that I used these, the more I could build up the whole piece, right until the end where the rhythm instruments take over completely with riffs. Variety in the tones of the guitars and keyboards was also really important here. For instance, having lots of reverb and delay on the piano and clean guitar in the spacier middle section. This made them feel less aggressive, even though they're still playing really fast. It was a real challenge to make something that felt like an actual piece of music, but these limitations forced me to take some approaches I wouldn't normally take. And I think that's the benefit of putting limitations on yourself as a writer, and it's something I'd recommend trying out for yourself. Now you might say, what's the point of going beyond these extremes? And I think it's important that there are musicians out there that are exploring the boundaries of music, rhythmically, harmonically, technically. And I'm not talking about myself, by the way, because I obviously just stole this idea from my good buddies Adam and Sean. And even if these explorations might not always be the most pleasing to listen to, as is probably the case with my piece here, there are definitely concepts and ideas from these explorations that can be applied to all different kinds of music. And it's exciting to think about all the amazing new music that musicians will create using these ideas. I titled this tune U.P.L, or Upper Perceptual Limit, and I'm going to let this play out the end of the video. In the interest of transparency, this is not a live playthrough of this piece. I'm playing over the pre-recorded and mixed final version. I recorded this tune and made this video in just over a week, and honestly I did not have the time to work this up to the point where I could play it cleanly in one take. I did record all these parts up to speed and in pretty large chunks for the most part. Here's a few videos of me during the recording process. I hope you enjoy U.P.L. I'm going to put this up on my Bandcamp for like $1. I'll also release just the song here on YouTube, and if there's enough demand, I can throw it up on streaming services as well. I might make some tabs too, so if you're interested in that, let me know. As always, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share. Till next time, stay proggy.